Hello, my name is Roman Dintihashvili, and here we continue a series of greatest chess players I have met. So this is part two on Bobby Fischer. So as I already mentioned, I visited him in 1980 after the Lone Pine tournament, and I already mentioned that I discussed a lot of theoretical positions. I played a lot of blitz with him. But also I mentioned that our meeting didn't end up on a good note because little stories when I explain it. So I left Soviet Union. I was living in Soviet Georgia, which is part of Soviet Union, in 1976 because there was no. Actually, I left in 75. There was no way I could play in any international tournaments because there was no way they would let me play outside of Soviet Union. They were always afraid that some chess player will defect, or there were a lot of reasons why they had their own favorite players. So I went through hell for last 2 years before immigrating. I went through hell, and I did not play any chess at all because I practically wasn't allowed to play since I was applied for immigration. And finally, I left. I set myself free. And here, I'm talking to the person that I admired all my life. And in the end of the conversation, in the end of our meeting, I mentioned to Fischer that I think it's a great idea to come back to chess. Remember, it was 1980, and he hasn't played tournament chess since 72. It would be a good idea to come back to chess and show everybody what he really is, that he is still by far the best player. On which reaction by Fischer was never expected by me. I saw completely different person. He accused me in being a Russian spy, in being a KGB agent, and he said I was sent to him to provoke him, and anyway, it was bad exchange of words, and I blew up also, and I don't want to go into details. It didn't end up well. And retroactively, I analyzed our encounter, and I regretted that I reacted this way because I wasn't prepared. I regretted because I should have been expecting from Fischer some crazy reaction. He was a crazy genius always, and I should have reacted a little bit differently. Well, anyway, that's how ended our meeting. But later, many years later, well, actually several years later, we get back in touch, in contact, not directly, but indirectly through one person we both knew and liked was in common. But that later. So for now, I want to show you one of the games that always fascinated me. And again, this is not one of the best games that was included by Fischer in his book. To me, it was one of the best games. Well, when you talk about best games in chess, I will tell you there are good games and bad games. Good games, bad games always stay bad games, but good games have many different categories. There are good game, there is okay game, very good game, and the best game. And it's always just like a food. It's a matter of taste. And in my taste, this was one of the best games Fischer ever played. It was played in 1967 in interzonal tournament in Sousse. So e4, e6, d3, d5, and knight d2. Fischer is trying to play King's Indian attack. And I want to tell you, this is the opening I have played myself as well. d3 and knight d2 setup is a King's Indian setup. I like this system specifically if black plays e6 first move. It's less attractive if black plays c5, d3, knight c6, and knight d2, because then black can go g6 and bishop g7. So the system makes a lot more sense when black has played e6, d3, d5, knight d2, knight f6, g3, c5, bishop g2, knight c6, and knight f3. Position is very well known in theory, but there are some fine points here. I don't know if they were known to Fischer in '67, but there was a lot of development in this opening after that. So after knight f3, bishop e7, white castles, and black castles. Now, more sophisticated way to play for black is b6. When e5 is not such a good choice, because knight d7, rook e1, and either bishop b7 and followed by g5, or maybe even g5 right away. And this is not such a comfortable position for white. That's why, but if black plays b6, good continuation is, I think, rook e1, and on bishop b7, in case black delays with a castling, then you shouldn't go e5, then we go e takes d. And now if knight takes d5, good continuation is always knight b3, and in case of castling, white has better position. I've played like this several times. c4, and after knight moves, then d4. White has slightly better position here. But black castled, and then that's a signal that white can go e5, because after e5, knight d7, and rook e1, g5 is not playable any longer because it makes terrible weaknesses on king's side. Of course, it's out of question, and that's what makes e5 good, e5 move good. After rook e1, b5 was played. Obviously, white is trying to organize attack on a king side, and black is looking for counterplay on the queen side. Knight f1, b4, h4, a5, and bishop f4. Bishop f4 was played just to have an extra protection for the pawn that white's pieces can maneuver easily on the king side. a4, and here is a little bit of a controversial move. Well, when I used to play this, I normally don't make any moves with the pawns with the white on a queen side. And this is known rule. When you attack on one side and your opponent attacks on the opposite side, general rule says that you don't make any moves on any pawn moves on that side, because that's the way your opponent is going to open files quickly. But later, after I stopped playing that, more and more players play a3 in this position. And the reason they play a3 lately is because they don't want, for example, if we go knight h2, a3, b3, they don't want black to have comfortable square on d4, and in some cases maybe even black knight going to a7, b5, and c3, having weakness on a2. I'm still not sure if a3 is a necessary move, but a3, that's what was played by Bobby. And actually, I think the reason why everybody started playing a3, because Fischer played a3. That might have been the pilot game when white started playing a3. So a3, b takes a, and b takes a. Of course, not rook takes a3, which will allow c4 attacking the rook on a3. So b takes a, knight a5, and now the move that I'm not sure about this move. I don't really like white's move knight e3. That was played. White wants to go to g4 with the knight, perhaps, but then d4 was played, and Fischer went back to f1. Well, I understand what he achieved. He achieved the weaknesses on e4 and c4 squares, and perhaps he wants to play knight f1, d2, and then knight d2 to e4. So anyway, knight f1 was played, and after knight b6, knight g5, queen h5 is coming, and after knight d5, bishop d2, black has to figure out what they're gonna do about their king side. Bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5. That's another controversial decision. I've had not exactly same position, but similar. And when I played knight g5, and eventually, sooner or later, black is going to have to take on g5. I was taking with h-pawn, and then playing, just to give you an example, knight h2, going to knight g4 and knight f6, trying to bombard the black's king side. hg could have been okay, but I like in this particular position Fischer's bishop takes g5 move better. Queen d7, queen h5, and bishop a6, bishop h3. Those moves were played even earlier. So bishop h3, well, I'm not sure why do we need the bishop on h3, but those moves were played. The reason why I like this game so much is the way the attack was performed. Rook fc8 from now on. Knight d2. And a bad move by black. Black played knight c3. Obviously, this move is very most natural move, knight c3. What should have been played is c4, but let me tell you why knight c3 was played. In this position, black sees that white already has very dangerous build-up on a king side. And knight is coming from d2 to e4 and f6. So they tried to prevent the exchange of those knights if knight goes to e4. However, c4 must have been played, had to be played, and then after knight takes c4, pawn takes c4, and bishop takes c4, white is still much better. After queen g4, bishop can go to f6, also pawn on d4 is hanging, but at least black is not in immediate danger. Knight c3, it accelerated white's attack. Knight e4, very strong move. Well, and now black has no good choices. Actually, knight e4 could have been played, but slight move order change, bishop f6 first. Well, obviously taking is gonna lead to complete disaster for black. And after queen e8, this move has to be played because on queen g5, black should be able to protect g7 pawn without weakening terribly their king side. So now knight e4, g6. Now you see that black has really no choices. Now queen f8 is going to lose terribly to knight g5. It's going to be completely excruciating attack here. On h6, for example, even knight takes e6 is going to result to complete devastation. King h8 just mate in one, and on king h7, bishop f5, it's overwhelming attack, and it can be executed several different ways. So g6 was played in this position, and now after g6, Abi played queen g5, not queen h6, because it will let queen come to f8 with a tempo, because obviously the last thing white wants is to exchange queens. So after g6, queen g5, knight takes e4, rook takes e4. Well, I think in this position, it's just matter of time whether black, matter of time when the black king is going to get mated. And rook takes e4, c4, h5, h5 threatens to open the h file and bringing the rook to h4. So here, nothing can stop white's attack. Rook h4, rook a7. Well, I want to point that something like d takes c will lose immediately after hgfg, and simple rook takes h7. This is nothing short of a mate. Well, something like c1, for example, we just take and go king h2. Now there is a threat of rook h8, rook g7, queen h6, And if white takes, it's just a very simple mate. So what happens still? Black found a temporary defense. They went rook a7. Instead of dc, they went rook a7. After rook a7, Fischer prepares some deadly mating combination, bishop g2. Bishop g2 is hard to understand move. Well, according to computer program, bishop g4 mates in 12 moves, but this was hard to see in the game. When bishop g2, actually Fischer mated his opponent quicker because his opponent didn't play the best way, but bishop g2 is absolutely winning as well. That's why a lot of times you see the winning combination and you see the forced win, and then they will tell you, you know what, this is a mistake. You could have won quicker. No, that is not a mistake. That's a mistake on a computer language. If you have mate in 4, it may not be good because there is mate in 3. But once you get winning position, normally any chess player does not search for more than that, because you cannot do better than just win the game. D takes c, and that's the deadly combination. Queen h6 check. Again, well, black played queen f8, but if they did c1 check, rook takes, and king h2, that doesn't change at all anything. It would have been the same as in a game, which continued queen f8, and you see why bishop g2 was played. Queen takes h7 check, king takes hg, double check, and mate next move. King g8, rook h8, and king takes pawn, bishop e4. That's why bishop went to g2. This is also mate and board, and that's how the game has ended. I think it was absolutely beautiful and straightforward attack. One of Fischer's biggest, strongest point was he was very straightforward attacking player. If he had an attack, he would never turn back because he will continue all the way with this attack. What I mean by that, it may sound a little amateurish statement, but let me explain myself what I mean by that. When he attacks, he believes in his attack. Then what he is doing is he makes absolutely best moves. His calculating ability was uncanny. So he makes absolutely best moves. And he was very rarely assessing his chances incorrectly. So if you evaluate position correctly, your intuition doesn't fail you, and you make the best moves, you hardly need any more than that to win a chess game. And that's exactly what was his main strength throughout all his career. So I hope you learned something about this opening and something about Bobby Fischer's strongest points. And there was some story too. I hope you enjoyed and have a very, very nice day. We're going to continue with this series very shortly.